Another day, another woman with a Bachelor of Arts in English. Creative writing to be exact, but this is part 2 of my series where I'm kind of going through all of the books I read in academia and whether I think they're worth it for the average reader, because they're mostly classics. And yes, also my name's Anna. So as you can imagine, I probably don't have as many required reads as an English major as a lit major had. In fact, I don't. I am gonna go through each year of college. There's over 30 here, so let's just get into it. There were 2 classes I read for throughout my freshman year, and they're actually both my first semester. So the first class was my Intro to Literary Studies. This was required for everyone, again, whether you're creative writing or literature. And also, of course, as you can imagine, I had an Intro to Creative Writing class as well before you got deeper into whatever you were focusing on. 2 books I am talking about for Intro to Literary Studies. The first one coming in hot with a very different opinion, and that is Beloved by Toni Morrison. No doubt this is an important text. This is about, I cannot say her name, so I apologize, but Sethe, who is born a slave, and it follows her on this property and the ghost memory of her child who passed. But the tombstone, as I'm looking at the blurb, is engraved with Beloved. So she calls the baby Beloved. And so yes, it's a huge homage to loss, to, the entire systemic slavery process and everything. So I didn't dislike what it stood for. I really just was very frustrated with Toni Morrison's writing. That being said, I'm absolutely still going to try The Bluest Eye. I wanted to read for a long time. But especially coming into a college class for the first time and getting thrown into Toni Morrison's writing, it was a huge challenge and really frustrating because I would reread pages over and over and it would still feel incomprehensible to me. She's very stream of consciousness, at least in this novel. I don't know if she's like that in all of her novels. I had a really hard time comprehending anything I was reading, and starting with this definitely made me really nervous for all of my literature classes, but this was a pretty unique reading experience for me that was like uniquely frustrating. That being said, I have read way more literature since then, and been strengthened in literary devices since then. So I would imagine if I read this again, I would retain much more. It would probably feel less like I'm running a hurdle race. But yeah, I think I have a hunch, regardless, that the stream of consciousness was just not for me. That was not how I would have chosen to intake a story like this. But I can also see how that's very intentional with the content that we're following in the story. But yes, I give it 2 stars. Then I read at least portions of, I don't know that we read the whole thing, but we also read The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and I loved this. Complete opposite experience in this same class. It has a lot to do with soldiers and war, and just meditating on the concept of burdens and what people are carrying. And I just remembered I really liked the symbolism. I really liked the layers of meaning. I love symbolism and I love metaphors, so this is not a surprise whatsoever. And I can understand that that is, another good way to focus on the concept of analyzing text, not just for what they literally are, but all of the layering underneath. So it makes sense that we read that for an introduction to literature. Yeah, then the other class, everyone had to take a first year seminar class, which was basically an introduction to what to expect from college classes, so teaching you like how discussion style works in college versus high school, what expectations are for like a research paper, which we practiced and went through, all of those types of things. So they just really emphasized wanting to make sure that people were prepared for the types of expectations for different kinds of assignments. I, of course, being an English major, picked the C.S. Lewis class and virtually love every single thing C.S. Lewis has ever made. So we read a billion things, but I have to say, easily reading 5 of the 7 Narnia books was my favorite thing that we read. It was so fun to return to a familiar story and feel that bit of coziness going into a season where I felt very vulnerable and uncomfortable because I'd never been independent before as a youngest child, outing myself. Narnia is fantastic. Narnia is like what I think of every winter time, anytime I see the joy of snow. And there's so many good layers spiritually, but there's also just so many good layers, period. And then we read 2 of the books from his science fiction trilogy, which is called Out of the Silent Planet. This one was interesting for me, but also bizarre. This is the type of science fiction that's just not my thing, but some of you might love it. So I'll just read the blurb because it's been so long. Dr. Ransom, a Cambridge academic, is abducted and taken on a spaceship on the red planet of Melicandra, which he knows as Mars. His captors are plotting to plunder the planet's treasures and plan to offer Ransom as a sacrifice to the creatures who live there. Ransom discovers he has come from the silent planet, Earth, whose tragic story is known throughout the universe. There's definitely, some deeper layers as well, because I think C.S. Lewis physically cannot not do that. It was super fascinating to see, like, oh, he did write other novels that were super different from Narnia. So, like, it was cool to see his breadth of content in that way. But when we had the option between reading the 3rd in the series or more Narnia, the class unanimously was like, can we please read more Narnia? So we only read the first 2. I have no idea how the series ends, and frankly, I just felt about it, so I didn't have a very strong desire to know what happened. And then we read some of his nonfiction as well. The 2 that I remember the most is we read passages out of The 4 Loves, which are basically C.S. Lewis breaking down the different types of love. Yeah, so there's, I forget what the actual root words for these are, but there's affection, friendship, erotic, and the love of God. It was very logical to me. It made sense why we would distinguish that there's more than one type of love. It's kind of the annoying thing about English when you're like, okay, other languages have all these words for love and we only use love. And it's like, okay, clearly I don't love pizza the same way I love my mom. So I liked that this was a lot more complex in the linguistics behind love. I appreciated that. I felt like that was overdue. So I was glad that I got to read something like that. And then the other one of his, I believe we read the entirety of, is The Great Divorce. And this one is also very spiritual. It's basically, if I remember correctly, about this bus of people who's on its way to heaven. They're going to receive judgment to see once and for all where they're headed eternally. The bus is going all the way from hell to heaven. It's meditating on good and evil, grace and judgment. His revolutionary idea that the gates of hell are locked from the inside. I don't remember that, but that's fascinating. I loved the class as a whole. It was very meditative. I liked the balance between the fiction and the nonfiction, and it was just lovely. I really enjoyed it. And obviously there were a billion other seminars that had to do with other disciplines, not just English, but I think most of us were either went on to be English majors, or I think there was a couple education majors in there. Maybe some social sciences, maybe religion. There might have actually been 1 or 2 people who went into science or math as well. So it was a cool mix of us, a lot of great contributions and perspectives in discussion time. So it made for a good class. Moving into sophomore year, I'm laughing because this was my least favorite literature class, so get ready. So for my major, we had to take one American literature course and one British literature course. The caveat being they could not be from the same time period. So you either had to pick early American literature and late to modern British literature, or early British literature and late to modern American literature. And I really love late to modern British literature, so I was like, okay, guess that means I have to take early American literature. Sophomore year, I took early American literature. So miserable. And the worst, but like, it's like so many puritanical texts where it's like fire and brimstone, and I'm sitting there like, and on top of it, we're not in a normal classroom, okay? We were somehow forced into the attic of the English building, and it was about 90 degrees up there. And also we did not have normal sunlight, so it's dark and really warm, and we're reading the most boring text I have ever consumed. And it is a miracle I did not fall asleep every single time. My saving grace in this entire course was Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is the only reason I think I did not fail this course. So we read The Raven, of course, probably Poe's most famous poem, and I really liked his gothic vibes. It was also just so refreshing from all the puritanical stuff and everything else that just felt like sawdust. I was like, finally, something that has personality beyond you're going to hell. So it was my saving grace. It was. And The Raven says nevermore a billion times, and that's kind of all you need to know. Edgar Allan Poe's fun. You should read him. Then we have the main poetry collection that we read a ton of was Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. And I don't dislike nature imagery in poetry, but it kind of just felt like the same thing over and over again, let alone by the end of the semester, it was like, I feel like we are rehashing the same thing in different words every single time. And that's not to say I dislike Walt Whitman's poetry, but I don't know, maybe it was the haze in the room, you know, like maybe I just need to go back when I'm not in a 90-degree room sweating. Probably, honestly. But I also feel like I have such a negative connotation now, I probably won't. And then one of my least favorite books of all time, we read passages from, but like a good amount of passages. So I have not actually read this entire book, but I read enough to want to slam my head into a wall. And I know some people love this book, so to each their own. This is the most boring thing I have ever consumed, and that is Moby Dick. Herman, my guy. Really? If I was to ever know the feeling of eating saltines and sawdust at the same time, it's Moby Dick. I'm sorry, that's just the reality that I live in. Might be different from yours. It very well might be, but the thing is, I distinctly remember finding the beginning of this book very entertaining. I really enjoyed pre-boat, but as you can imagine, this is mainly about our protagonist being on a boat and running into Moby Dick, hunting Moby Dick, etc., etc. As soon as we got on the boat, I was like, it's like a sensitive subject, but it's not. I'm just like, this is the epitome of how painful sitting in that room was this book. Didn't I say I was gonna tell you whether or not you should read these? I haven't been doing that. I would definitely say don't read Moby Dick, and I'm not just saying that because I hate it. I also like, you don't have to read something that long to get the point. Like it's like the definition of, you could have stopped and the point could have easily been made with like 5% of what you published. I would say read Edgar Allan Poe. I would say read some Walt Whitman. You don't need to read all of Leaves of Grass. I would say everyone should at least read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, for sure. Out of the Silent Planet, I would say no. The average person's not going to be interested, but if you're into that niche of sci-fi, you'll definitely enjoy it. And I think generally his nonfiction is either for curious agnostics or Christians. I don't think anyone beyond that would really desire to pick them up. I would say a lot of people would love Beloved. I'm just not in that category. And again, the content is important, so I would say read Beloved. But you might be like me and be frustrated, and so if you're finding that experience to be really frustrating, don't break your back over it. Just put it down and read something else. I think the things they carried is cool because everyone has burdens. So then we go into junior year. Junior year was easily the best reading year, where I genuinely was like actually reading every word, whereas I'm gonna have to almost exclusively read you blurbs of books when we hit senior year because the senioritis was so strong. The first sect of books on here, there's 3 main classes I read from during my junior year. The first one was my British literature course, which was late to modern British literature. So one of the books we read was my girl, Jane Austen. We read Persuasion by Jane Austen. Yay, we have physical books now, so that also means I enjoyed them because I have physical copies. Persuasion, I really enjoyed, but again, this is like where I started having a larger volume to read, so I read these really fast. So the retainment is low, but I remember really enjoying it. This one follows Anne Elliot, and she is 27. Love that. Love to see an older female protagonist, especially for Jane Austen. And it says, she's been persuaded by her friend Lady Russell to break off her engagement to Frederick Wentworth, a handsome naval captain with neither fortune nor rank. What happens when they encounter each other again is movingly told in Jane Austen's last completed novel. Set in the fashionable societies of Lyme Regis and Bath, Persuasion is a brilliant satire of vanity and pretension, but above all, it's a love story tinged with the heartache of missed opportunities. I really appreciated the maturity in this story. I feel like this, of all of her books, is probably the most mature. There's a lot more self-awareness. You know, you're not just dealing like with Kitty Bennett being really annoying in your face, you know. And so that's also what I enjoy about having an older protagonist in this case, in this type of book. It just brings a lot more realism than a lot of the younger protagonists tend to. So I really enjoyed this, and I would reread this. Would I tell the average person to read Jane Austen? No, because her writing is really hard to adjust to because it's just so removed from 2025 writing. And also if you don't like romance, like, you're not really gonna like her stuff. Then we read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I remember I had to do the presentation for this discussion, and of course I showed the scene in Arthur with Jekyll and Hyde, because why wouldn't I have? So this is about Dr. Jekyll, and this experiment goes wrong, I believe. It's a dark psychological fantasy, and it gave the birth to the idea of the split personality, which I feel like most people know by now, but I really appreciated that it was short, succinct, straight to the point. The mystery, the very melodramatic gothic horror element built up very nicely, where you're kind of like, I know it's the same person, but you're also like confused what all is going on, how it's all working, just in the way that the story is told and the perspective that you're viewing it throughout. And I would say the pacing was really good. It keeps your attention the entire time, and it unravels at like just the right pace that you would hope a mystery would, while also being a little, I don't know if gruesome's the right word, but like kind of. So I think it tackles some similar ideas to Frankenstein, but in a very a shorter and a simpler way, and personally I just appreciated that. And then we read the play by Oscar Wilde, The Importance of Being Earnest. We mainly read it together, which was a fun experience. I remember I really enjoyed reading plays growing up, and like verbally reading them with friends. It just brings the story to life a lot more, because that's really how you're supposed to intake them as well. Oh, by the way, I would recommend Jekyll and Hyde. Keep forgetting that. Importance of Being Earnest. I thought it was just okay. I would not recommend this to everyone. I would recommend Oscar Wilde as a whole, but I don't think you have to intake The Importance of Being Earnest. It's a madcap farce about mistaken identities, secret engagements, and lovers' entanglements. It was written in 1895. The rapid-fire wit and eccentric characters have made it a mainstay of the high school curriculum for decades. Okay, apparently people are reading this in high school. I didn't have to. But Cecily Cardew and Gwendolyn Fairfax are both in love with the same mythical suitor, which is a bit entertaining. Jack Worthing has wooed Gwendolyn as Ernest, while Algernon has also posed as Ernest to win the heart of Jack's ward, Cecily. When all four arrive at Jack's country home on the same weekend, the rivals to fight for Ernest's undivided attention and the Ernests to claim their beloved's pandemonium breaks loose. Only a senile nursemaid and an old discarded handbag can save the day. I feel like in a way it's kind of a more modern take on a lot of things Shakespeare would do in his plays, so I can understand why it's touted as being a play to read in classes for sure. And then the last main novel that we read in my British literature class that I also really enjoyed was Jane Eyre. I would say this one's a little more, it's definitely more accessible writing-wise, but also probably more interesting to a broader audience than Jane Austen. Jane Eyre follows Jane as she grows up. It's a coming-of-age story for sure. This is the gothic novel I love way more than Wuthering Heights. I do not care for Wuthering Heights, so it starts when she's a girl, and then it follows her through adulthood to figuring out her relationships, her romantic life, and also working through like her past. And yeah, it's a good mixture of elements of the story through like friendship and womanhood, and also romance and family, and it touches on a good array of topics that are a lot more universal than like just only focusing on romance, which is oftentimes Jane Austen's novels. So definitely more applicable to a wider audience, but I would still say there's definitely still like romanticization, not as much realism in the relational dynamics in a way that I would say women tend to enjoy more than men when it comes to reading books. So for that, I would say as a little more of a specific target audience, so I probably wouldn't recommend it to the average reader. But if you really like a bold woman who really comes into herself and learns how to communicate well for herself, this is a really good novel to do that. Okay, then we get into one of my favorite creative writing classes that I took, which was my memoir writing class. And so we read 3 fantastic memoirs. I would honestly recommend all 3 of these. I own 2 of them, and the 2 that I own are 2 all-time favorite books of mine. And the other one I don't have, but they're all covering a wide variety of life experiences that are all so important. I really do love memoir anytime I read it, so I really need to get back into reading more memoir, because done well, it is a really great shortcut to empathy, but also a great shortcut to awareness about a topic, usually not just about a person. And I find that these memoirs are all effective because they focus on people, but simultaneously like a lifestyle or a like it also maps onto like a larger group of people. It's not just writing about someone for the sake of remembering them, but all of these memoirs speak volumes about so many more people than the literal people that they're speaking about, and that's why I find them very affecting and moving and powerful, and why I would recommend all 3 of these to the average reader. So the first one is Holy Ghost Girl by Donna M. Johnson. I will read the blurb for you because I think it gives you what you need to know, and it's really good. It's very distinctive. Donna Johnson's remarkable story of being raised under the biggest gospel tent in the world by David Terrell, one of the most famous evangelical ministers of the 60s and 70s. Holy Ghost Girl is a compassionate, humorous exploration of faith, betrayal, and coming of age on the Sawdust Trail. She was just 3 years old when her mother signed on as the organist of tent revivalist David Terrell, and before long, Donna Johnson was part of the hugely popular evangelical preacher's inner circle. At 17, she left the ministry for good with a trove of stranger-than-fiction memories. A homecoming like no other, Holy Ghost Girl brings to life miracles, exorcisms, and face-offs with the Ku Klux Klan, and that's just what went on under the tent. As Terrell became known worldwide during the 60s and 70s, the caravan of broken-down cars and trucks that made up his ministry evolved into fleets of Mercedes and airplanes. The glories of the word mixed with betrayals of the flesh, and Donna's mother bore Terrell's children in one of the several secret households he maintained. Thousands of followers, dubbed Terrellites by the press, left their homes to await the end of the world in cult-like communities. Jesus didn't show, but the IRS did, and the prophet healer went to prison. And it also adds recounted with deadpan observations and surreal detail. And yeah, it is very affecting in all of these that they are telling parts of their life stories and casting a light on someone from their life as well, in this case David Terrell, but also it's done so objectively in these, it makes it all the more powerful. Like somehow they surpassed the personal flavor and just tell the truth in as unbiased of a perspective that they can. And I don't know, maybe some of you have like known people or yourself was a part of something like this. I think it's really important to understand what goes on in these weird cult religious practices around the country, around the world. It was shocking to read because I personally was not born when this happened. But it's so fascinating to see how quickly a culture can rise up and be believed in, and the amount of manipulation that goes on and is just so quickly believed is wild and terrifying. But really, really important survey of these types of religious cults, and just really important. It's really important to have the information, not just for history's sake, but for just being aware, taking care of yourself and others. And then the other two, I'm gonna say my favorite for last, even though it's probably the most well-known. But we read The Mountain and the Fathers by Joe Wilkins, which, like I said, this is one of my all-time favorite books. And this takes place in the Big Dry, which is in the Bull Mountains of eastern Montana. Joe Wilkins was born into this land, and it examines the violence, confusion, and rural poverty found in this American landscape. And as you can imagine by the title, a lot of this follows various father figures in his life. He didn't grow up with his father, so it has a lot to do with examining what a father is, what it means, and how these different men in his life played parts in what a father is. And so it was very familial based, very personal, but also like such a good meditation on what it means to be a boy and a man and a father, and how all of these male relationships intermingle. And it's definitely something I will go back to and recommend to many men that I know. And then my favorite is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. If you don't know, even the movie with Woody Harrelson and Brie Larson was done fantastically. This follows Jeanette. This is a memoir about her father, and this is about their very unconventional childhood. She grew up in and out of actual academia, but was raised by an abusive father and a mother who was pretty emotionally absent and depressed. They were constantly moving around to evade accountability. For her and her siblings, like growing up thinking that was normal as well. And so I think this is probably my favorite because I'm really passionate about mental health, and this has so much to do with it. It is astounding to me that she wrote something this emotional, this mentally taxing, and did it in the most objective way I've ever heard someone recount their life. I think everyone should read this. I think you can read just the first page and you'll be hooked. It is such a moral dilemma to know a family member is harmful, but simultaneously have so much love for them, so much compassion for them. It's so real. It's so complex to the real relationships that we have with family, and she does it so well. It's so easy to eat this book up, and I just really like the way she starts the story, continues the story, and ends the story, and it's very unforgettable. It's very rewarding to reread as well. And then I took a novel writing course, which was the most challenging but rewarding class I took throughout college easily, at least in my English degree. And we did read a couple books at the very beginning of the semester to look at story arcs and how almost all stories follow the same type of plot arc, and so we were analyzing that before we wrote our novels. And so we read two kids books that showcased this arc very well in different ways. The first one was Number the Stars by Lois Lowry, who also wrote The Giver. It takes place in 1943, and it follows 10-year-old Anne-Marie Johannesson and her best friend Ellen Rosen and their life in Copenhagen with school, food shortages, and Nazi soldiers marching through town. So when the Jews of Denmark are relocated, Ellen moves in with the Johannessons and pretends to be one of the family. So it's not too different from The Book Thief. So I really enjoyed it because I enjoy both of those books. I appreciate the amount of sacrifice that are in these stories, the risk that people put themselves under in order to love and care for others. I think it's one of the coolest things that humanity does. It's, in my opinion, one of the most Christ-like things that humanity does, and this was just another powerful narrative where people were willing to risk themselves for the sake of justice, for the sake of love and compassion, and not wanting to dehumanize other people. And then the other book that we read was 3 Times Lucky, which is a Dale and Mo mystery. So this was just a fun little murder mystery in a small town with these 6th grade kids, and I just remember it was just delightful. These were so easy breezy, fun to read, and it was such a reassuring ease prior to doing something very hard, which was write a novel. I wouldn't necessarily say everyone needs to read those, or the average person. I think there's certainly really good reads for children, but not necessarily a must read. And then every single English major had to take ethnic American literature, specifically young adult ethnic American literature. And this was maybe my favorite literature course. I was so grateful that I got to take it. I love young adult literature. I tend to write young adult literature because I love a coming of age moment, but this was even better because it was about all kinds of people throughout the course. We read about a wide variety of kids, and I was so appreciative for the amount of empathy that I got to sit in this class every single day. I already talked about this in my high school reads, but I did reread An Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. I'm not going to go into detail, but I do think it's worth a read, and just really entertaining and amusing and easy and enjoyable. And then we read one of my favorites, actually no, but definitely one of my favorites we read was Monster by Walter Dean Myers. This is actually written in a script format. This is a little bit of narration and then it's a script, which is super unique, and I found that a very entertaining and fun reading experience as well. I love a unique format to a book, which I've said several times on my channel before. But this is about Steve Harmon, and he's a 16-year-old kid who's on trial for murder. And as you can imagine, it has a lot to do with race and prejudice and breaking down stereotypes, and it was just fantastic, straight to the point, very good. Sometimes you need something on the nose, and it was very good. I would recommend that one to the average person for sure. My favorite that we read in this class that I would recommend to everyone is The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, which some people maybe also had to read in high school. This is a bunch of vignettes, which are essentially disconnected stories about the same or similar characters in the same world, and they're very short. So as you can imagine, it's already short, and then the stories are really short, so you could read this in one sitting, 2 sittings if you wanted to. And it follows Esperanza Cordero growing up in the Hispanic quarter of Chicago, and so it follows her her identity as a girl and becoming a woman and what that all means, but especially in a Hispanic community. It did a really good job of giving us a little window into the specific pride behind being Hispanic, and also some of the specific dangers about it as well. And I thought this was a beautiful, beautiful ode to Hispanic women especially, and was very poetic, very lovely writing, at times very blunt in a way that makes it memorable as well. We read American Born Chinese by Jean Luen Yang, and this was a graphic novel, which was super fun. I loved the variety of book formats in this class. It was so entertaining. And it follows Jin Wang, and it also follows a couple other. So Jin Wang, Monkey King, who is part of one of the oldest and greatest Chinese fables, and then Jin Qi. And Jin Qi is like the Chinese stereotype. He's like embodies Chinese stereotype. So it was a really good juxtaposition of these three storylines, but then bringing them all together to emphasize a Chinese ethnic experience. It was done so well. It encapsulated the culture so well, the relational dynamics, the othering. And so for empathy's sake, I would say this is definitely another one to read. It can make you viscerally uncomfortable at times, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. And yeah, it was also extra powerful because it was a graphic novel. I think it needed to be. I think you needed to experience the discomfort visually as well, and very important. These are all just so important for the sake of empathy, for the sake of bridging reconciliatory gaps where we have them relationally, ethnically. We did read Summer of the Mariposas by Guadalupe Garcia McCall, but I'm gonna be totally honest, I barely read it, so I did not actually read this one. But this follows a Mexican-American retelling of the Odyssey, basically. And I think that's also why I didn't read it. I was like, well, I generally know the Odyssey, and I think it was near the end of the year, and yeah, my energy was just not there. But it follows Odilia and her four sisters. They find a dead body in a swimming hole and embark on a hero's journey, like the Odyssey, to return the dead man to his family in Mexico. So it's a cool glance at the Mexican-American experience, but also bringing in that understanding of classical literature, and also turning classical literature on its head a little bit to engage with a different culture rather than the dominant classical culture of whiteness. So I really appreciated that it did that, but my attention span at that point in the school year was just not there. So I can't really tell you should read it, or that the average person should, because I didn't really. And then the final one that we read was Shadow Shaper, Danielle Jose Older. This one was fun. This was an urban fantasy, which I'd never really read before, and I'm honestly still interested in potentially reading more urban fantasy. Because I really liked the combo of, I feel like I have to, growing up with Harry Potter, the combo of the real world with fantasy. And I remember in our class specifically, we would talk about gentrification a lot. And I feel like Shadow Shaper also had a bit to say about gentrification. So I really appreciated those conversations because my college was also in a town that was pretty segregated, unfortunately. Yeah, it also has a lot to do with like generations in a family and like generational issues. And it does have a lot to do with graffiti. So yeah, that makes sense why gentrification would be a theme that we meditated on throughout this book. there's a supernatural order called the Shadow Shapers who connect with spirits via paintings, music, and stories. I loved how art was enveloped in this story as well, because it is such a beautiful outlet for anyone and everyone to make themselves heard, to not be invisible, even if people can treat you as invisible. And so, yeah, there's some Caribbean roots to the story here, and it was a joy to meditate on the themes. And then we have my senioritis year, where I'm almost exclusively gonna have to read you blurbs. Sorry, that's a little less fun. But I took a cultural heritage course. So basically we were required to take 2 cultural heritage courses, one of them more modern, one more ancient. And basically what that meant is it was a combination of history, philosophy, and literature, all put together. So my first course, which I took my freshman year, was ancient. So it was a lot of like Plato and Aristotle. It was much more like philosophy heavy. And so my second one I took my senior year, and it was much more literature heavy. So it spanned a huge range of time. It was called Western Cultural Heritage. So yeah, so we started with The Pilgrim's Progress by Paul Bunyan, right? Paul Bunyan. We started with The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. And this, again, was another one of those like Puritan era. This is so boring to me. So it's his progress through life in search of salvation. It's a faith allegory, basically. He like meets figures who are like literally concepts in faith, I'm pretty sure. And he's journeying to the celestial city. There's monsters, spiritual terrors. I think I also just didn't like it because of how on the nose it was. That kind of bled it dry of any value I personally, as an English major, could have found in it. And so I think maybe also after all of my years of literature studies, I was like, this is like too straightforward for me and not the type of literature discussion I like having. So I would not recommend. So then we read Candide by Voltaire, and it's a story of a gentleman who, though pummeled and slapped in every direction by fate, so dramatic, clings desperately to the belief that he lives in the best of all possible worlds. Okay, calm down. I feel like this was very melodramatic from what I remember, but these were all so short. So if you're interested in any of these from this class, they were all super short. This had a lot of satire. I think also we were going through not just books in different time periods, but different types of books. So this one was a little more like a satire that we were reading. Then we read The School for Scandal. This is by Richard Brinsley Sheridan, and it's a classic comedy that pokes fun at the London upper class society in the late 1700s, so also a little bit of satire. It's often referred to as a comedy of manners, and it's one of his most performed plays and a classic of English comedic drama. We did read a few plays. I feel like plays generally I would not recommend, because I'd recommend watching them instead. Okay, time for some German literature. We got into Faust Part 1, which is by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, with Peter Salm as the translator for this one. Perhaps the greatest work in German literature. What a claim. Faust has made the legendary German alchemist one of the central myths of the Western world. Here indeed is a monumental Faust, an audacious man boldly wagering with the devil, Mephistopheles, what a name, that no magic, sensuality, experience, or knowledge can lead him to a moment he would wish to last forever. So this was a lot more philosophical and meditative. Then we read the one that I read in my intro to literary studies that we then reread in this class, which was A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. And this is a play that has a lot to do with feminism. It's about the tragic hypocrisy of Victorian middle-class marriage. It's basically a wife coming to terms with her individuality and like, excuse me, what are we doing? It's great. This was my first Tolstoy. We then read The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and it is on the subject of death, as you can imagine, and dying. It's the story of a worldly careerist, a high court judge who is never given the inevitability of his dying so much as a passing thought. But one day, he discovers existentialism. Basically, death announces itself to him, and to his shocked surprise, he's brought face to face with his own mortality. I feel like that's also very egotistical. I'm pretty sure I found it depressing. So, was middling in feel. Generally, I can easily spiral with existentialism, so can't say I would recommend this one to the average person. Then we read Damien by Hermann Hesse, and the blurb is in German. So, could I tell you what it was about? No. The book that was worth reading through all the other ones, though I do enjoy A Doll's House, but it was like, okay, but I already read that one though. And that is Night by Elie Wiesel, which I did recently talk about in a book length, like short book recommendation video. So not gonna go into too much detail, but this is a nonfiction about Elie Wiesel's time in an Auschwitz concentration camp. Just wild that he went back in to write this and publish this for us. Very powerful, very succinct, not unnecessarily wordy, just gets right to the point and will make you cry. Okay, and then the last book we read that was the most modern is Cry, the Beloved Country, which takes place in South Africa. This is the most famous and important novel in South Africa's history, was an immediate worldwide bestseller in 1948. It's about a black man's country under white man's law, and I think this is a quote from the book. It says, "Cry, the beloved country, for the unborn child that is the inheritor of our fear. Let him not love the earth too deeply. Let him not laugh too gladly when the water runs through his fingers, nor stand too silent when the setting sun makes red the veld with fire. Let him not be too moved when the birds of his land are singing, nor give too much of his heart to a mountain or valley, for fear will rob him of all if he gives too much." This was a fantastic cultural moment for just gazing upon South Africa. Again, I just love books, experiences where I really feel like I get to sit down with a specific person, specific group of people that I don't regularly, and better understand what it means to be them. My hope is that I will continue to read from at least one author from every country in the world before I die. I just think that's really important. I can't go everywhere. I can't experience all these different kinds of lives, obviously, because I'm not these people, but I can at least empathize through literature, and I'm very, very grateful for that. So I definitely appreciated this course, even though it's the least memorable of the books that I read. And I really liked how broadly we surveyed countries and experiences throughout the Western world. And then the last class that I read for it was my advanced fiction writing. This was like my creative writing capstone course for my degree, and wrote multiple short stories that all had like a thread throughout, connecting them all, even though they're all about different characters. It was super fun. My short stories had a lot to do with body image and women, and so the through line was a moment with a mirror. I was very passionate about it. It was really fun to get people discussing body image in the class, so I really enjoyed it. And throughout, we read 2 short story collections to analyze the way that two other authors did a fantastic job of connecting stories with a through line of characters and other moments. The first book, short story collection, was Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich, and this was part of a Native American trilogy. I actually didn't realize it was a series. But this was a really, really good read, I remember. Each story was so distinctive and lush with description and character relationships. It's set on and around a North Dakota Ojibwe reservation, and it's an epic story about the intertwined fates of two families, the Cashpaws and the Lamartines. And it was so powerful in the stories that it told. It was like some sort of sucker punch every story about a character, a relationship, the way the world is. There was always something memorable to take away from each story, and Native American literature is also something I really want to read more of, so I was very, very appreciative that I had to sit down with these stories, and I would recommend them to the average person. And then the other collection is a little bit more well known because it's a Pulitzer Prize winner, and that is Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. This we didn't read all of, but then I proceeded to read the rest because I enjoyed them. It follows Olive. She's a grumpy older woman, and she's also very sassy and you know, has that talent for sometimes saying things very bluntly that are like actually very true, and people are like shocked because it's like, okay, you're saying something a little too true right now. She's basically that kind of person. And so it is also a different survey of womanhood, contrasting with House on Mango Street. This is more so working through, for lack of a better term, I guess, coming of age in a different way, coming of age into being an elder, being much older in life, and accepting what that entails, whether it's a lot of loss, whether it's a lot of loneliness, whether it's being othered in a different way, not for ethnicity, but rather just for age. This collection looks at a lot of important stuff with being old, and for that it was very, very memorable and very bittersweet, tugs at your heartstrings, and you really feel for Olive. It's cool to see the ways that she grows and evolves and expands her life from maybe limitations she's put on herself. So I would recommend this as well. Empathy for the older people in your life. Very, very affecting and well done. So I think we were kind of maybe close to like 50-50 here of things that I would recommend you read versus not. Yeah, it was a joy to study English. I again, I was not in literature only major, so I also wrote a ton as well as read, but I am very appreciative, you know, looking back through, thinking back through my education. I got a really good survey of really empathy of what it means to be all kinds of people on Earth, and how that gives you a distinct life experience from others around you. I'm so grateful that I got to stand among so many shoes in my literature journey throughout college, and it's definitely something I've carried into adulthood, of prioritizing any time a book transports me into deeper empathy. One of my biggest priorities in life is to love people, because I'm called to that in the belief that I believe in. And so reading is one of the quickest ways that I work on loving other people. It is the biggest reason that I read, honestly. I'm so grateful to all of these authors, to every writer who puts something out there because you are believing that your experiences, your storytelling, the way that you sit in the world is worth other people understanding, because it is. So keep writing, keep reading. The better we understand one another, the better we love one another, the less division we have, the more harmony we have. And if there's anything the world needs right now, it's empathy. So I think the world kind of needs reading right now. I am working through seasonal depression, so if you're struggling with that, I'm right there with you. If you just want to be a good human, English is a fantastic study. So happy Thanksgiving.